aircraft, and he needed assistance, so we rolled up his chute, and I had that, and with him on one shoulder and the parachute in the other, we made our way back down to the road. And by the time we got there, the Edison service crew had been working several miles up the road, and they had seen this, and they came up there, and they had some first aid equipment, and they had water and one thing and another, and so they could give us some assistance there. And then I made my way over to the wreckage, and I found Slim Perrette, the pilot, had been picked up by a fellow with a pickup truck that came along and brought him over to the wreckage, and so we eventually all reconnoitered at that point.
And you got to fly in the P-61 a couple times, didn't you, Jerry?
I had two flights in the P-61. One we went out over the ocean, took off from Hawthorne Field here, and the pilot was Max Stanley, and I was sitting in the second seat right behind the pilot, and he went down low over the ocean, about 50 feet or so off the water, and he fired the upper turret guns, and that was a very deafening sound. And then he fired the 20 millimeter cannons in the belly, which was more like a boom, 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 boom. And in all, it was a very exciting flight. I helped design the airplane, and it was a very thrilling project.
Your landing was much more uneventful, I assume, than Roy's.
My landing was very uneventful. Although I will say I was able to look out and see the landing gear when the wheel touched the ground, and the landing gear strut actually bent way back and came forward. I didn't realize that things deflected that much. What looks like something very solid can actually deflect. That was very surprising. There
were several versions of the P-61, and the one that everybody seems to have this interest in is this was the original night fighter.
Yeah, that was the P-61A. It took off from Hawthorne Airport the first time. I think it was 1942 in May, and I watched the flight. I'm sure Roy was there. Vance Breeze was the pilot, and he taxied down to Crenshaw Boulevard, turned around, and the engine stopped. He restarted the engines, and they stopped again, and he restarted the engines. And I thought he was very brave to continue with the takeoff, but he did take off toward Prairie Avenue, and circled Hawthorne, came back in and landed. It was a very successful flight, and very thrilling for me to watch.
Were you, when you were on your flight on the second seat, were they actually shooting live rounds into the water?
Live rounds, yeah. 50 caliber machine guns and 20 millimeter cannon.
And how close were you to this area?
We were probably 2 miles off of Marina del Rey.
Wow. But
it was very restricted area, so there were no other airplanes in the area. There were no boats in the area. It was real live stuff.
What would be the difference in the capabilities of the night version of the P-61 and the earlier versions?
Well, from the very beginning, it was designed as a night fighter. The first airplane was a night fighter, and it was not equipped with radar. They didn't have the radar yet, but as soon as they got the radar and we got airplanes into production, they installed the radar, and it was a night fighter right from the start.
One question I asked you once before was, the guns are located right between the propeller blades. What keeps the bullets from knocking the blades off?
The upper guns could go up and down. They could also go around 360 degrees. But we had mechanical and electrical interrupters that prevented the pilot from shooting the propeller or shooting the tail when the guns were pointing aft. He could hold the trigger down, but the guns wouldn't fire.
So, Cindy, is there any way you're going to get us one of these for the museum?
Gee, I believe there's only one on the East Coast. But I do have a question for Roy. Can you show me, Roy, on the model, where it was you had to come out through the window?
There's an escape hatch that comes out here, and I was taking pictures. I would remove that and fly with this an open area. And this is the area that I would leave in getting out of the aircraft. And it was down on this bottom side of this engine where the exhaust and the supercharger were, where the gasoline was flowing. It would have been down in this area here. The flame and the raw fuel would run back here, and it sucked up in the wheel well. And then it would be burning there, and it would come back here, and there were pieces of the boom that would be melting off also. And you knew sooner or later that it was going to structurally fail, which it did when Slim was standing up in the cockpit at this area, deciding how he was going to get out, because one of the things that you didn't want to do was to go over the top, because you could be impaled on the muzzles of the guns, or you could catch your harness on there and you'd have a free ride to the ground. So when this weakened enough, the structure failed and the whole empennage tore off of the aircraft, and it threw Slim out when this portion tumbled then. And then when I saw it as I was coming down, after Slim had gotten out, it was inverted in just this section, and the crew nacelle was inverted and was in a flat spin and burning. And it looked like a big kerosene rag falling out of the sky with the smoke and the flames and things coming up from it. So it was in this area that I got out of, and Slim got out from up in this area.
Roy, why do you suppose, with all that fuel flowing, free-flowing on that right engine like that, did the engine actually quit running?
Well, we made sure that it quit, because there was nothing we could do about the fuel, because that was gravity feed from the tank down to that point. And we shut the engine down, and then eventually the other engine quit also. And when the fire was burning up in the wheel well, it burnt the control cables, so we had no control of the aircraft. And that's why the airplane was literally falling out of the sky. And between the time that we started trying to get Slim into his harness and the time that I got out, we probably went from about 13,000 feet down to, the terrain was about 2,500, between 2,500 2,800 feet there, I think, at that point. We had probably fallen to about 5,000 feet above terrain. And then Slim got out a little later than I did, because I left a few seconds ahead of him. And just was a free ride from then on.
How much elevation do you need for the parachute to be effective and to take off?
It depends upon air speed, but because we were flying and falling at a gravity rate, probably mostly, we were probably 150 miles an hour, something like that. And your parachute will open at that speed, and at that time we were using 28-foot Irwin air chutes, 28-foot diameter canopy, and probably would open in, I'd say, 250, 275 feet completely.
And when that parachute opens, how fast do you slow down?
Very quickly.
And what speed do you think it slows down to?
Well, then you're falling at about the rate of, well, if you have no wind blowing or anything, it's probably about like jumping off of an 8-foot wall.
So it really jerks you when the chute opens.
Yeah. Well, I used it when I did some demonstrating shoots at the old Mines Field. They had the air shows on Sundays. I used a chute called an Eagle chute, which was designed for closed course racing pilots. It opened at 100 feet.
Wow.
And that really snapped you. You saw little cartwheels and things for a few seconds afterwards till your circulation got back to normal. But you had to make sure that your harness was very tight and you crossed out of your groin and across your chest, because if it wasn't, you were going to get some rash burns from the harness.
I imagine you could hurt your back and shoulders and other things
well,
too.
Depending on what your position was when it opened, because your body is going to snap around. The chute's going to go vertical, And if you're hanging in the air at this point, you're going to torque yourself around, and you can sort of feel your spine kind of snap back together again, so to speak. But you can get snapped pretty good sometimes.
Well, I don't think...
The chutes they have today, I would love to use those because they're a snap compared to what we used to use.
I think I would be terrified to jump out of an airplane with a parachute.
Well, if it comes to whether you stay with the aircraft or jump out, you'll find a way. And you'll find that everything slows down to the point it's like slow motion. I think they asked us afterwards when we were talking about and reconstructing this, how long it was between the time we realized that we were going to have to leave the aircraft until we got out. And Slim and I thought, oh, maybe 4.5 minutes. And according to Captain Wharton in the Muroc Tower, they estimated it was about 1 minute and 20 seconds. So we were doing a lot of things very quickly, but it was like it was forever, you know.
And you didn't get to take the camera with you when you jumped?
No, because I had to put that stuff down to climb up in the forward part of the cockpit to help Slim. And an interesting thing happened with the aircraft when it was inverted and falling. Some of the equipment stayed in the aircraft. Some of it fell out through this open hatch. And the camera that I was using for the newsreels was a 35 millimeter camera. And a fellow, there was about 70 some people that showed up within about 30 to 40 minutes after the impact of the aircraft. And one of the fellows found this camera. The case had come open, but the film was on the reel, and a lot of it could have been salvaged. But he thought that he was doing a good turn, and he unrolled the film and used it as a rope around the wreckage.
Oh.
So all of the film was lost.
How unfortunate.
So most all of the film that we actually had shot was lost.
As I look at the P-61 and you see where the crew has to get out to actually jump, there's a lot of things behind you that could be very dangerous.
Well, that is right. And that's why when we made this motion picture for the first motion picture group that makes movies for the Air Corps in those days, on different aircraft on how to eject or how to escape from the aircraft. And as I said, that in making the one for the P-61, we determined through some wind tunnel tests and all that going over the inner wing along the crew nacelle was not the best thing to do. We had one of the other fellows that jumped from an aircraft that buzzed the field here at Hawthorne, and one of the spoilers didn't come out, and the aircraft rolled, and they were at pretty low altitude, and he thought they were going to crash, and he was riding back in the back end, and the radar operator, he got himself out of the aircraft, and he was upside down fortunately, but his knees, just below his knees, hit the bottom side of the horizontal, and it caused him to tumble. Then he opened his chute, and very fortunately didn't get himself tangled up in the shroud lines.
And this particular aircraft was manufactured right here at Northrop in Hawthorne, wasn't it?
Oh yes, all the P-61s, and as Jerry was mentioning, the P-61 was the first night fighter that was designed originally as a night fighter. That was its sole purpose. But it did see other kinds of service when it was used in the European theater because of the tremendous amount of firepower that it had with those 420 millimeters in the belly and the 450s in the turret. You came in firing forward. Patton and his group would have them for support to go in after tank columns and fire into these tank columns with that. And I'm sure that they deterred a lot of tanks from doing some of the things that they intended to do. But it was the original design the purpose was to be a night fighter. And Jerry was mentioning about the top turret firing over your head. It was only about 10 or 12 inches above your head. And when we were doing a test to develop flame arresters to cut down on the flames that would be visible at night when you were sneaking up on an airplane, you didn't want to light up the world, you know. So we were developing ways